Junior Inspector Catal's third tendril slipped off her control panel, causing her holoscreen to flicker momentarily. After 20 straight hours of scanning primitive worlds, even her species' legendary focus was beginning to waver. Sector 7 had yielded nothing but the usual pre-industrial civilizations, empty worlds, and the occasional primitive spacefaring race still fumbling with chemical rockets. She was about to log her final report when a peculiar energy signature caught her attention. Grid coordinates 359 to 471 showed regular patterns of juvenile life form concentrations, far too organized to be natural. Catal adjusted her sensors, bringing the small blue-green world into sharper focus. By the first ones, she whispered, her skin shifting to a pale yellow of concern. The readings were clear. Thousands of juvenile specimens, contained within rigid geometric structures, surrounded by energy barriers and adult guards. Her initial assumption of some sort of educational facility evaporated when she detected the strict movement patterns and scheduled containment periods. The door to the monitoring station hissed open, and Chief Investigator Xthrax glided in, their crystalline exoskeleton catching the soft blue light of the holoscreens. Inspector Catal, your shift ended 3 hours ago. Why are you still? They stopped mid-sentence, multiple eyes focusing on the display. Sir, Catal straightened, her tendrils instinctively arranging themselves in a formal pattern. I've detected something disturbing. This world, designation Earth according to their broadcasts, appears to be systematically imprisoning its young. Xthrax moved closer, their auxiliary eyes extending on crystalline stalks for a better view. The data streams confirmed Catal's assessment. Regular patterns of juvenile containment, strict scheduling, segregation by age groups, and what appeared to be forced labor disguised as something they called homework. Magnify grid section 47, Xthrax commanded. The holoscreen zoomed in on a particular structure, designated Lincoln Middle School in the local language. They watched as hundreds of young humans filed through metal detection barriers, surrendered their personal belongings, and were escorted to designated containment areas. Most concerning, Xthrax's voice resonated with harmonics of disgust. They're not even trying to hide it. These facilities are prominently displayed in their population centers. Catal pulled up additional data streams. Sir, it gets worse. They have an elaborate system of behavioral modification. Look at these grades and detention protocols. They're using psychological manipulation to ensure compliance. Xthrax's exoskeleton darkened, a sign of deep disturbance among their kind. In all their centuries of serving on the Galactic Council of Justice, they had never encountered such a brazen violation of juvenile rights. Even the notorious Zixthar Empire provided their young with unrestricted development periods. Prepare a preliminary report for the Council, Xthrax ordered, their tone grave. Include all sensor data and behavioral analysis. I want particular emphasis on their containment methodologies and these standardized tests they seem to use for assessment. As Catal compiled the data, Xthrax continued studying the feeds. Something about this situation felt different from typical cases of species exploitation. The humans weren't hiding their actions. In fact, they seemed proud of these institutions. Parents willingly deliver their offspring to these facilities, often documenting the moment with primitive image-capturing devices. Sir, Catal interrupted their contemplation. The preliminary report is ready. How should we proceed? Xthrax considered the options. Standard protocol would call for immediate intervention, but the unusual nature of this case suggested a more measured approach might be warranted. Maintain surveillance for now. I'll personally lead an observation team to the surface. We need to understand the full scope of this situation before we present it to the Council. As they turned to leave, Xthrax paused. And Catal, good work. Your attention to detail may have just saved an entire generation of young humans from whatever systematic oppression their species has normalized. Neither of them could have predicted how spectacularly wrong their conclusions were, nor how this discovery would fundamentally change the galaxy's understanding of human development. The cloaking field around Extrax's observation team shimmered in the morning sun as they positioned themselves outside Washington Elementary. They had chosen this particular facility for its manageable size and what appeared to be lower security, though the presence of brightly colored climbing structures in the outer yard puzzled them deeply. Containment barriers appear primitive, Lieutenant Varel noted, scanning the chain-link fence, though the psychological deterrent of these. She consulted her translator. Monkey bars must be significant. Extrax was about to respond when a yellow transport vehicle approached, its side marked with bold black stripes. Observation positions, they ordered, their team spreading out as small humans began pouring from the vehicle's doors. Their first shock came from the noise. Unlike the orderly, silent processions they'd expected from a prison transport, these children were laughing, shouting, and in some cases, singing what appeared to be an endless song about a vehicle's illumination components. "Sir," Varel's voice carried notes of confusion. "My readings indicate elevated endorphin levels. These juveniles appear to be happy." Before Extrax could process this anomaly, a high-pitched bell rang, and the children formed loose lines to enter the building. They followed one particular group, their cloaking technology allowing them to slip unnoticed into what their intelligence had identified as a third-grade classroom. Sarah Chen's room was not what they expected from a detention center. The walls exploded with color, student artwork, scientific diagrams, and something called a word wall covered every surface. The young humans settled into their seats, chattering excitedly about something called a science experiment. "Today," Mrs. Chen announced, holding up 2 containers, "we're going to learn about chemical reactions using vinegar and baking soda." Extrax's auxiliary eyes extended in alarm. "They're conducting chemical warfare training on juveniles," they whispered to Varel. Their horror mounted as Mrs. Chen began distributing the materials. But it was their malfunctioning cloaking device, overwhelmed by the chaotic energy levels in the room, that turned the situation into a diplomatic incident. The first sign of trouble was a slight shimmer in the air near Tommy Peterson's desk. Tommy, already vibrating with excitement about the upcoming experiment, was the first to notice the crystalline form of Extrax materializing beside him. "Cool," he shouted, causing 27 other heads to turn. The room erupted into chaos. "It's an alien. Does it eat homework? Can it do TikTok dances? I told you they were real, Kevin." Mrs. Chen's teacher training hadn't covered extraterrestrial visitors, but her experience with classroom management kicked in automatically. "Everyone, remember our class rules about unexpected visitors," she called out, somehow maintaining her composure. The children, to Extrax's utter bewilderment, immediately sat down and raised their hands, though they were practically bouncing in their seats with questions. It was Jenny Martins who accidentally escalated the situation. In her excitement, she knocked over her cup of vinegar, which spread across the floor toward Extrax's team. Their attempts to avoid the liquid caused their cloaking fields to fail one by one, revealing 4 more alien forms to the astonished class. "Are you here for Parents' Career Day?" asked Tommy, completely unfazed. "Because my dad isn't coming until Thursday, and he only works at the bank." Extrax, faced with 28 enthusiastic children and 1 remarkably calm teacher, did the only thing their extensive training had prepared them for. They attempted to formally announce their investigation of human juvenile imprisonment. "We are representatives of the Galactic Council of Justice, Irto." "Can you make your eyes do that googly thing again?" interrupted Sarah Johnson from the back row. "Does the Galactic Council have recess?" asked Miguel. "Are you made of crystals like my mom's fancy necklace?" The barrage of questions, combined with the children's obvious lack of fear or oppression, forced Extrax to initiate an emergency retreat. As they fled through the classroom door, they heard Mrs. Chen calmly asking the class to write a paragraph about what they had observed, reminding them to use descriptive language and proper punctuation. "Preliminary assessment," Extracts transmitted to their ship as they hurried down the hall. The situation is far more complex than initially believed. These humans appear to be employing unprecedented psychological techniques. Request immediate council consultation. Behind them, Mrs. Chen's class had already turned the incident into an impromptu lesson on the scientific method, with the children enthusiastically hypothesizing about why the aliens' cloaking technology had failed. The Galactic Council's emergency broadcast interrupted every screen on Earth simultaneously. Television shows, smartphones, billboards in Times Square, all displayed the crystalline form of High Counselor Zarekith, their multiple eyes glowing with righteous indignation. People of Earth, the transmission began. Universal translators working overtime to convert the complex harmonic speech into human languages. We have discovered your crimes against your own young. Your systematic imprisonment and psychological conditioning of juvenile humans ends now. In the White House Situation Room, the president watched as damning footage began playing across the screens. A gym class doing jumping jacks was labeled forced physical conditioning. A spelling bee became public humiliation ritual. The cafeteria lunch line was described as regulated nutrition control. They're particularly upset about something called dodgeball, reported the National Security Advisor, scrolling through the growing list of alien accusations. They've classified it as sanctioned juvenile combat training. Meanwhile, at Washington Elementary, Sarah Chen was trying to maintain order in her classroom while alien ships hovered overhead, casting crystal-like shadows across the playground. No, Miguel, we can't go outside to wave at them. Yes, Sarah, I know their ships are pretty, but we still need to finish our math lesson. The UN Security Council had convened an emergency session, but their first attempt at explaining the concept of education went dramatically wrong. The alien representatives recoiled in horror when shown a typical school schedule. You segregate them by age, Strax demanded, their crystalline form vibrating with dismay. Force them to remain seated for 6 Earth hours. Subject them to regular standardized assessment of their worth. Each translation seemed to make the situation worse. The broadcast continued. We have documented thousands of these schools across your planet. Your young are confined within designated cells you call classrooms, forced to perform repetitive tasks, and subjected to a hierarchical system of authority figures known as teachers and principals. Social media exploded. #Alien School Inspection began trending worldwide. Students everywhere were posting their own interpretations of their imprisonment. My algebra teacher is actually the warden, one viral post claimed. Does this mean no more homework? The aliens said it's cruel and unusual punishment. Another celebrated. But I like school. #Unplose our schools, a third argued. The situation reached peak absurdity when the Galactic Council presented their evidence about school buses. These yellow transport vessels, Zarekith announced gravely, collect your young at designated extraction points, separating them from their familial units for mandatory attendance at these institutional facilities. Mrs. Chen had finally had enough. During her lunch break, she marched out to the playground, hands on her hips, and looked up at the hovering alien ships. 20 years of teaching experience had taught her how to handle misunderstandings, even interplanetary ones. Your ships are disrupting my students' concentration, she called out. If you want to understand what's really happening here, come down and observe properly. But no more hovering. You're blocking our sunlight for the class plant experiment. In the Council's ship, Extrax watched this display with their auxiliary eyes extended in surprise. The human educator shows remarkable courage, they noted to their colleagues. Perhaps there is more to investigate here. The UN's second attempt at explanation was interrupted by breaking news. Hundreds of teachers worldwide were following Mrs. Chen's example, inviting alien observers into their classrooms. The hashtag Teach the Aliens had overtaken #Alien School Inspection. Look, the French ambassador tried explaining to the council. Education is how we prepare our young for. Prepare them for what? Zarekith interrupted ominously. For life. Mrs. Chen's voice cut through the chamber. She had somehow gotten past UN security and now stood before the council, carrying her teacher's planning book and a stack of student artwork. "And if you'll stop broadcasting dramatic accusations for a moment, I'll show you exactly what that means." The council chambers fell silent as this single human educator faced down the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds. In that moment, the fate of Earth's educational system, and humanity's standing in the galactic community, rested in the hands of a third-grade teacher who simply refused to let anyone, human or alien, disrupt her students' learning. The Galactic Council Chamber, with its soaring crystalline spires and hovering platforms, had never seen anything quite like Sarah Chen's presentation. She stood at the center, armed with nothing but her tablet, 20 years of teaching experience, and the kind of patience only developed through decades of parent-teacher conferences. "Before you pass judgment," she began, pulling up a video on the chamber's holographic display. "Watch this." The footage showed Tommy Peterson's first day in her class, struggling with basic reading. The alien council leaned forward, multiple eyes focusing as the next clip showed Tommy 2 months later, confidently reading aloud to his classmates. "This is what you call imprisonment," she challenged. "This is Tommy discovering he can read anything he wants to learn about. That's not chains, that's freedom." Extrax's crystalline form shifted colors in confusion. But our scans showed elevated stress patterns during these testing periods. Sarah nodded. "Of course there's stress. There's also joy, triumph, and sometimes failure. That's how learning works." She swiped to another video, this one showing her class's failed attempt at building a paper tower. "Watch what happens next." The council observed as the children, instead of accepting defeat, immediately began discussing what went wrong. They reorganized, tried new approaches, and finally succeeded, their celebration causing several alien delegates to adjust their audio sensors. "In your species," Sarah continued, "how do you handle failure?" The chamber fell silent. Zreketh finally answered, "Our young are born with all necessary knowledge. Failure is unknown to us. Then how do you learn to overcome challenges? How do you innovate?" Sarah loaded another video, this one showing her students during their science fair. "These prison cells you've observed are laboratories of trial and error, where making mistakes is just as important as getting things right." The evidence continued. Sarah showed them morning meetings where children learned conflict resolution, group projects that taught collaboration, and even a particularly chaotic art class that had several council members reaching for their environmental stabilizers. But the containment barriers, one delegate protested weakly. The structured schedules. "Those aren't barriers, they're boundaries," Sarah explained, her teacher voice in full effect. "Children need safe spaces to learn and grow. Structure isn't imprisonment, it's scaffolding." She pulled up one final video. The previous week's classroom celebration, when Jenny Martinez finally mastered long division. The pure joy on Jenny's face made even Extrax's crystalline surface ripple with emotion. "Your species sees our children spending years learning basic skills as a weakness," Sarah said, facing the council directly. "But that's our strength. Every human child starts as a blank slate, full of potential. They can become anything because we give them time to discover who they are." The council chamber erupted in discussion, thousands of alien languages creating the symphony of debate. Sarah stood her ground, remembering how she handled her class during their most chaotic moments. Zreketh raised all 4 appendages for silence. "You speak of potential and discovery, but our scans show clear evidence of segregation by age, mandatory attendance, and this disturbing practice of homework." Sarah smiled the smile of every teacher who's ever had to explain why finger painting is actually crucial for development. "Let me show you something else." She pulled up a time-lapse video of her classroom over a single day. The council watched as the room transformed from a science lab to a writer's workshop, from a mathematics center to a collaborative art space. They saw children move from focused individual work to dynamic group activities, from structured lessons to creative exploration. This isn't a prison, Sarah concluded. It's an incubator for the future. Every human adult you've ever met, every inventor, explorer, and leader, they all started in a classroom like mine. Extrax, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. High Counselor, I request permission to conduct a more thorough investigation, perhaps through direct observation of Educator Chen's methods. Sarah suppressed a smile, recognizing the look of someone who'd just discovered a whole new world of possibilities. She'd seen it countless times before, usually on the faces of first graders discovering they could read on their own for the first time. Well, she said, checking her tablet, my class is doing their butterfly life cycle unit next week. You're welcome to join us, as long as you follow classroom rules, of course. Extrax's first day of classroom observation started with an unexpected crisis. They couldn't fit into the tiny chairs. Mrs. Chen solved this by creating a special observer's corner with a standing desk, though the sight of a crystalline alien taking careful notes on a Hello Kitty notepad somewhat diminished their official dignity. Today, Mrs. Chen announced, we're continuing our butterfly life cycle unit. Extrax will be joining us to learn about how caterpillars transform into butterflies. Just like how we transform into bigger kids. Tommy shouted enthusiastically. Extrax's auxiliary eyes extended in alarm. Your species undergoes metamorphosis. Our preliminary scans didn't indicate. It's a metaphor, Mrs. Chen explained patiently. Though sometimes it feels literal, especially during growth spurts. The morning progressed with Extrax documenting everything in increasingly bewildered notes. Observation 7. Young humans require frequent snack breaks. Nutrient consumption appears directly linked to attention span. Observation 12. Raising your hand system appears to be primitive crowd control method. Surprisingly effective. Observation 15. Children display remarkable ability to absorb new information while simultaneously wiggling in chairs. Purpose of wiggling unclear. The real breakthrough came during group work. Mrs. Chen divided the class into teams to create butterfly life cycle diagrams. Thrax watched in fascination as the children organized themselves, assigned roles, and began working together, with varying degrees of chaos. They're so inefficient, Thrax commented, watching one group debate whether to color their caterpillar green or purple for 3 minutes straight. Yes, Mrs. Chen smiled. That's the point. They're learning how to work together, compromise, and solve problems. Sometimes the process is more important than the result. The alien observer's crystalline surface flickered with confusion. In our education pods, information is simply transferred directly. No debate required. And how often do your people come up with completely new ideas? Before Extrax could answer, disaster struck at Table 3. Miguel had accidentally spilled water on their group's project, threatening to ruin an hour's work. Extrax moved to intervene, but Mrs. Chen held up a hand, watching. The children, after a moment of dismay, began problem-solving. Sarah suggested they could turn the water stain into a pond. Jenny ran to get paper towels. Miguel, instead of giving up, started redesigning their diagram to incorporate the accident into the art. Remarkable, Extrax whispered. They've turned a failure into an adaptation. That's what humans do best, Mrs. Chen replied. We learn from our mistakes. Each failure is just another opportunity for growth. The afternoon brought physical education, which Extrax had been dreading since the dodgeball incident. Instead, they found themselves recruited as a base for an educational game about planetary orbits, with children running in circles around them, while shouting facts about the solar system. Your survival rate for such chaotic learning methods is impressive, Extrax noted, slightly dizzy from tracking 28 orbiting children with their multiple eyes. By the end of the day, Extrax had filled 3 Hello Kitty notepads with observations. They had witnessed arguments and reconciliations, failures and triumphs, moments of confusion transformed into understanding, and what they initially thought was a riot but turned out to be a particularly excited reading circle. As the children packed up to leave, Jenny approached the alien observer. "Mr. Extrax, will you be here tomorrow? We're going to learn about fractions using pizza. Pizza has educational value." Extrax's surface rippled with surprise. On Earth, Mrs. Chen laughed. "Everything can have educational value if you approach it the right way." Watching the children leave, Extrax made their final note of the day. Most significant observation: human educational system not designed to imprison, but to liberate. Each challenge, failure, and success builds upon the last, creating beings capable of continuous adaptation and growth. Request immediate revision of Galactic Council assessment. Also, request permission to stay for pizza fractions lesson. They paused, then added one more line. Additional note: acquire more Hello Kitty notepads. Current supply insufficient for documented level of human educational chaos. The Galactic Council's emergency session had drawn representatives from over 1,000 worlds. The chamber hummed with tension as Extrax approached the central platform, their crystal forms still bearing traces of glitter from the morning's art project. "Honorable Council," they began, "I stand before you to present evidence that will fundamentally change our understanding of human education." A holographic display activated, showing Mrs. Chen's classroom from the previous week. First, Extrax continued, "Observe this seemingly chaotic process humans call brainstorming." The footage showed children shouting out ideas for their space exploration project, each suggestion wilder than the last. "Inefficient," scoffed a delegate from the hive minds of Sector 7. "Primitive," agreed another. "Watch," Extrax commanded. The hologram showed how Mrs. Chen guided the chaos into creativity, how random ideas combined into innovative solutions. The class had designed a space habitat that, while technically impossible, demonstrated problem-solving approaches that even the Council's engineers found intriguing. "But surely," Zrakith interrupted, "direct knowledge transfer would be more effective." Sarah Chen, who had been waiting quietly at the chamber's edge, stepped forward. "May I?" she asked Extrax, who nodded respectfully. "Direct knowledge transfer sounds efficient," she acknowledged. "But watch this." She played a new video. Tommy struggling with a math problem, his frustration evident. The Council watched as he worked through it, made mistakes, tried again, and finally arrived at the solution. The neural patterns during this process, Extrax explained, their auxiliary eyes extending for emphasis, shows something remarkable. Each failure strengthened the learning pathways. The struggle itself enhanced understanding. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Sarah seized the moment, pulling up another video, this time of the class's failed attempt to build a model bridge. "In your systems," she challenged, "what happens when something fails?" "Failure is corrected immediately," responded the hive mind delegate. "The correct solution is implemented." "And how many truly new solutions has your species developed in the past century?" The chamber fell silent. "Now watch," she continued, showing the children rebuilding their bridge. They tried new designs, tested different materials, and finally succeeded with an approach that even their textbook hadn't suggested. "This is not imprisonment," Extrax declared. "This is perhaps the most sophisticated development system in the galaxy. These schools are not detention centers. They are innovation incubators." The evidence continued, children learning to read, then using those skills to explore new ideas. Simple math leading to complex problem-solving. Art projects teaching both creativity and cooperation. Even the dreaded dodgeball demonstrated tactical thinking and physical coordination. But the most compelling evidence, Extrax announced, came from yesterday's pizza fractions lesson. A hologram showed children dividing pizzas into sections, learning mathematics through practical application. Several council members leaned forward, intrigued by this novel teaching method. Their educational system, Extrax concluded, does more than transfer knowledge. It creates beings capable of generating new knowledge. Every challenge, every failure, Every success builds upon the last. Sarah stepped forward again. You see imprisonment because you are looking at education through your own experience. Your species are born knowing everything they need. Humans are born knowing almost nothing. And that's our greatest strength. She played one final video, a time-lapse of her students over a full year, showing their growth, their struggles, their achievements. This is not a story of imprisonment, she declared. This is a story of potential becoming reality. Every human child contains unlimited possibilities. Our education system doesn't limit them. It helps them discover who they can become. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Species that had looked down on human education for generations were suddenly seeing it in a new light. Extrax's surface rippled with satisfaction as they watched understanding dawn across the assembly. Zarekith raised their appendages for silence. We must deliberate on this evidence. But first, they added, their tone shifting to one of curiosity. Could you explain more about this pizza fractions method? Sarah smiled the smile of every teacher who's ever watched someone discover the joy of learning. Actually, she said, I think this might be better as a practical demonstration. Who's hungry? The Galactic Council's Xenobiology department was in chaos. After 3 days of analyzing human neural development patterns, the chief researcher, Dr. Ilara, had called an emergency session that drew observers from every major scientific institution in the known universe. The implications are staggering, she announced, her bioluminescent form pulsing with excitement. Human neural plasticity isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented. The holographic display showed comparative brain scans, a hive-mind child born with complete knowledge, a crystalline infant already capable of complex calculations, and a human baby, its neural pathways largely unformed. What we perceived as primitive, Wylera continued, is actually evolutionary brilliance. Their extended childhood, which we dismissed as inefficient, creates potential for unlimited adaptation. Extrax, still wearing their world's OKS teaching assistant badge from Mrs. Chen's class, stepped forward. Show them the learning progression. The display shifted to show Tommy's brain activity while learning to read. Each attempt, each failure, each success created new neural pathways. The assembled scientists watched in amazement as the child's brain literally rewired itself through the learning process. It's not just their children, Eulera explained. Human adults retain significant neural plasticity throughout their lives. They can learn, unlearn, and relearn continuously. In Mrs. Chen's classroom, oblivious to their role in a galactic scientific revolution, the children were engaged in their newest project, teaching basic English to a group of alien observers. The sight of crystalline beings attempting to pronounce, "The cat sat on the mat," had become surprisingly normal. But the most remarkable discovery, Wylera announced, pulling up new data, is their emotional integration during learning. The scans showed complex interactions between emotional and cognitive centers during problem-solving. Fear, excitement, frustration, and joy all contributed to strengthening neural connections. When Jenny finally understood division, Extrax added, their surface rippling at the memory. Her neural activity showed patterns we've never seen before. The emotional satisfaction actually enhanced the cognitive achievement. One of the hive mind scientists raised an appendage. But surely this makes them vulnerable. Emotional involvement in learning seems messy. Exactly. Eulara's bioluminescence brightened. That mess is precisely what allows them to think in ways we can't. Their neural pathways aren't just storing information. They're creating new connections, new possibilities. The evidence was undeniable. Human children, through their inefficient learning process, developed neural architectures that allowed for unprecedented creativity and problem-solving abilities. Back at Washington Elementary, Mrs. Chen was dealing with her own scientific breakthrough. Miguel had just successfully explained the water cycle to a fascinated group of alien observers using nothing but a crayon drawing and enthusiastic sound effects. Most significant, Eulera concluded, is their ability to transform failure into learning opportunities. Watch this. The display showed Sarah Johnson's infamous failed volcano experiment from the science fair. The aliens watched as initial disappointment transformed into curiosity, then determination, and finally innovation as she redesigned her entire project. Each failure strengthens neural pathways, Ilera explained. Their brains actually become more capable through the process of making mistakes. Extrax's auxiliary eyes extended thoughtfully. Perhaps, they suggested, we've been asking the wrong question. Instead of wondering why humans take so long to learn, we should ask, what are we missing by learning too quickly? The implications rippled through the scientific community like a shockwave. Species that had prided themselves on their innate knowledge suddenly wondered about the cost of never experiencing discovery. Civilizations that had looked down on human education began to question their own limitations. In the back of the chamber, a young crystalline scientist raised their appendage. Could we learn to learn like them? Ilera's bioluminescence dimmed thoughtfully. That's the next question we need to answer. But first, she added, pulling up one final scan, we need to understand something they call kindergarten. These neural patterns during finger painting are particularly intriguing. As the scientific community grappled with their discoveries, Mrs. Chen's class continued their day, unaware that their simple acts of learning and growing were revolutionizing galactic understanding of cognitive development. Though some of the children did wonder why their classroom now had more alien observers than students. 6 months after the initial prison scandal, Washington Elementary's Open House Day had become the most exclusive event in the galaxy. Representatives from thousands of worlds crowded the elementary school's hallways, their various appendages clutching orientation packets decorated with student artwork. Remember, Mrs. Chen addressed the assembled aliens. The same rules apply to you as to all visitors. No disrupting class, no unauthorized experiments, and absolutely no direct knowledge transfer to the students. We learn the human way here. The transformed school now featured specialized observation areas in each classroom, though the third-grade science lab still bore scorch marks from when a plasma being got too excited during the volcano project. Today, she continued, we'll demonstrate our integrated learning approach. And yes, she added, noting several crystalline forms vibrating with anticipation, there will be pizza involved in the math lesson. Extrax, now officially the school's interstellar relations coordinator and unofficial assistant art teacher, guided the first group of observers into the classroom. Their Hello Kitty notepad had been upgraded to a datapad, though it still sported several glitter stickers. As you can see, they explained professionally, until a small voice interrupted. Mr. Extrax, Tommy called out, we got the butterfly experiments wrong again. Come look. The alien diplomat's formal demeanor dissolved immediately as they hurried to the science corner, their auxiliary eyes extending with interest. The gathered dignitaries watched in fascination as Extrax and the students brainstormed new approaches, their crystalline surface reflecting the children's excitement. In the principal's office, now renamed the Galactic Education Exchange Center, Sarah Chen met with the Council's Education Committee. The walls were covered with children's drawings of their alien visitors, including one memorable crayon rendition of Extrax playing dodgeball. The exchange program is exceeding expectations, she reported. We've already had successful pilot programs in schools across Earth. The children adapt remarkably well to alien instructors, though we did have to ban telepathic homework help. And the other species' progress? Zrakith inquired. Sarah pulled up the latest data. Young crystallines were showing the first signs of neural plasticity after participating in human-style learning activities. Hive-mind children were developing individual problem-solving skills. Even the energy beings had learned to finger paint, though they needed special non-flammable materials. But the most significant development, she added, is this. The display showed footage from a classroom on a distant world, where alien children were experiencing the joy of discovery for the first time. Their instructor, a recent graduate of Earth's new Interstellar teacher training program, guided them through the process of learning through trial and error. "We're not just teaching them facts," Sarah explained. "We're teaching them how to learn." Back in her classroom, the day's main event was about to begin. The students had prepared a special demonstration of human learning methods, featuring everything from group projects to artistic expression. And now, Tommy announced proudly to the alien observers, "We're going to teach you about Earth music." What followed was possibly the most chaotic and joyful rendition of Old MacDonald Had a Farm ever performed in the galaxy. The sight of dignified alien diplomats attempting to make animal sounds would become legendary in council records. As the day wound down, Extrax found Sarah grading papers in her classroom. "The Council has officially designated Earth as the Galactic Center for Educational Innovation," they announced, though they're still slightly confused about the necessity of recess. Sarah smiled, thinking of how far they'd come from that first misunderstanding. "Did you tell them about the new research showing that play enhances learning?" "I tried." Extrax's surface rippled with amusement. "But they want a practical demonstration. The council members have requested a session of tag tomorrow." Looking out over her classroom, now a bridge between worlds, Sarah felt a familiar surge of teacher's pride. On the walls, alongside multiplication tables and vocabulary lists, hung photographs of human and alien children learning together. The prison had become a gateway to the stars. "Well," she said, reaching for her lesson planner, "we'd better make sure they understand the no tagbacks rule. We wouldn't want another intergalactic incident." And somewhere in the galaxy, a young alien child was discovering, for the first time, the joy of learning something new, the human way.